Hey everyone, my name is Jake, and today we're going to start off with a little trivia game. So I need everyone at all of our locations to participate and have some fun with us here today. And so the game's simple. I'm going to give you the name of a story, and you're going to shout out the villain or the bad guy that we associate with that story. All right, you guys up for it? Good, great, because we're doing it. All right, so we're going to start with a classic. Who was the villain in The Wizard of Oz? Wicked Witch of the West. Excellent. On the ball. Okay, here's another one. Who was the villain in 101 Dalmatians? Cruella de Vil. Yes, Cruella de Vil. If you're not familiar with the story, Cruella de Vil, she decided that she was going to make a jacket out of Dalmatian puppies. Now, we can put up with a lot of things. Mink coats, bearskin rugs, alligator boots. But when you want to make a coat out of puppies, you kind of cross the line, right? Right? You can imagine if you're okay with that, like what's next? Kitten mittens, right? You got to stop this thing. All right, so here's one of my favorites, and if you're a true Philadelphian, you should get this one. So there's a challenge. Who was the bad guy in Rocky IV? Rocky IV. I heard it. Ivan Drago, yes. Yes, so Ivan Drago. So if you're not familiar, he killed Rocky's best friend, Apollo Creed, in the ring. And he's standing there in the ring as he's dying, and he says, if he dies, he dies, right? Classic bad guy line, definitely makes our category. All right, so Harry Potter is popular with the young and old. Who's the worst villain in that series?
He who must not be named.
We heard he who must not be named. A true Potter fan, I'm going to name him and play the odds here. Voldemort. I don't want to leave you hanging. So yes, indeed, the true Potter fans are in the house. So, okay, doing well here in Parkside. You guys are really killing in Parkside. Other locations, I'm sure you're doing well. I have one more for you. Who is the villain, the bad guy, in the story of Christmas, in the story of Jesus' birth? Anybody know? Who's the bad guy? King Herod, that's exactly right. And so you might think King Herod is an unlikely candidate for the topic or the main character in a Christmas message series, but that's what we're going to talk about today. Because I think there's something that we can all learn if we take a good look at his life. Before we do that, I want to be honest with you, and I want to let you know that I have a goal this morning. I have a goal, and every preacher has a goal. I'm just going to let you know what it is from the start. And so here's my goal. If you're listening, and at some point in your life, a year ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was a time in your life when you made a decision to follow Jesus. You asked Jesus into your life. You prayed any type of prayer to start a relationship with God. But then over time, you started to drift away and you moved away from God. And that could be for any number of reasons. One, you had a bad church experience. Those are common. Or maybe you had a church you really liked and then you moved away and just couldn't find that other church that felt as good or made you feel the same way. And so you're like, this is never going to find that church. Or maybe you went to college and you heard some things that made you kind of question the Bible and is it really true? Or maybe something happened in your life that shook you. Something terrible happened, something you didn't understand. And you said, you know what? If this is the way God is, this is the way he deals with us, like I'm done. I don't need this anymore. And you walked away. Maybe you just got busy. And over time, God kind of got pushed out. But if that's you, I'm not here to question the validity of your experience or to kind of drill down on that. Like that's your experience. That's what you've been through. That's your story. And if you walk through that. And I might have landed the same place you did if I walked through it as well. But if you're here and you can relate in any way to what I'm saying, this is my hope today. This is my goal. That in this Christmas season that you'd make the decision to re-engage with your faith. And re-engaging with your faith, it could look like any number of things. It could mean that you pray for the first time in a while. It could look like this. Hi, God. It's me. It's been a while. And then you just talk. And God meets you where you're at. Re-engaging your faith, it might look like just open your Bible and reading for the first time in a long time and seeing, all right, let's see what this does for me. Or maybe it's finding that one friend that you have that you know has a close relationship with God and having a heart-to-heart with them and kind of talking with them. Whatever it is, I'm encouraging you to do it. And here's why I want you to do it. Because that faith that you started way, way back when, it's not dead. It's not dead. That little flicker, that little flame of a light that every once in a while kind of stirs up inside of you and makes you think to yourself like, oh man, like I really should go back. And then you get distracted again or you get reminded of that reason why you walked away in the first place. But then someone says something or someone does something that stirs it up inside of you again and you're like, I can't get rid of it, it's still there. Well, what we believe and what you believed at one time is that voice, that thing that you can't quite extinguish, that's the light of life. It's the voice of Jesus you invited in maybe a long, long time ago. So my goal for today is that you would choose to re-engage with that faith in this Christmas season. All right? So now you know, I've showed my hand. Now let's talk about King Herod. So a little background on the man. He was the Roman-appointed king of Judea. And so Judea was the capital, the capital of Judea was Jerusalem. And Jerusalem's in the news a lot right now. And so that's where that context is. And so the Romans, they made Herod the king of Judea, even though he wasn't Jewish, which the Jews were not happy about at all. Now Herod was extremely smart. He was politically savvy, and he was very, very ambitious. And he undertook a number of large building projects like aqueducts and seaports and huge structures because he was so consumed with building his legacy. And in those days, that's the way that you really made your mark. And so he jumped in with both feet. His most famous project was his expansion of the Jewish Second Temple. And so he was remarkably talented, but his ambition, that was the thing that really kind of got him in trouble. And that's why I say that there's a little bit of Herod inside of all of us. Because Herod was so concerned about his legacy and his kingdom and securing that, he did just about anything to stay in control. For example, he named one of his sons to be his heir, to be the next king, and then he became suspicious that he might be trying to assassinate him. And so he had him executed. It's like a son. He's like, all right. So then he picked another son to be his heir. And after a while, he became suspicious of him, and he had him executed too, right? So you think your family's dysfunctional. Tough place to be. So after a while, you can imagine that his sons are like, you know what, Dad? I'm good, right? I'll keep my day job. I'm fine. I don't need to become the king. Someone else can do that. So everything that King Herod did was to maintain control. And so even though he wasn't Jewish, he did things to try and please the Jews so he could secure his kingdom. And so that's why he did things like expand the Jewish temple. But even in the midst of that, if he became suspicious in any way, he would lash out, and he had no problem killing the Jewish teachers, the rabbis. So when King Herod became suspicious or angry, someone had to pay. Now, when King Herod, he enters the Christmas story, he's an older man. He's about 70 years old, and he has a painful kidney disease that ultimately will take his life. So in this season of life, he is extra concerned about maintaining control and ensuring that his succession plan is carried out. So that's where we find him. And it's in the middle of this state of mind that King Herod, he gets some news. It's the worst possible news for him. This is what he hears. He hears that just 5 miles south of Jerusalem, where he's at, there's a new king. A new king. And this new king is just learning how to walk. Matthew picks up the story. He says this: after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked. Okay, so the Magi, also known as the wise men, we call them both things, they were educated Persian astronomers, and they were onto something. They come to the town, and they're going around, and they're asking this question. Now, imagine how this is going to go over. They say, where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? We saw his star, and when it rose, and have come to worship him. So they're walking around Jerusalem, and they're asking everybody, like, hey, where's the new king? Where's the new king? And everyone in Jerusalem's like, shh, what are you doing? Like, this is not going to go over well. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him.
I bet they were. Then when King Herod got disturbed, everybody got disturbed because something bad was going to go down. Herod's kingdom, his legacy was at risk, and someone was going to have to pay. When Herod, had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. So Herod, he calls in all of the religious leaders, and he has them in one room. You can imagine the tension in this room. Everyone's thinking the same thing. Let's just appease the king and get out of here with our heads, right? That's what they're doing. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. So this has been predicted for many, many years. Like all the Jews knew this story. They knew it was coming. But for Herod, like his world was coming to an end. This is a disaster. So then Herod, he called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Yeah, right. Sounds just like Herod. Can't wait to go welcome the new king. Yes, indeed. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. This word worship, a lot of times in our day, we consider that to be synonymous with singing, but that's not what it means. Worship means to give worth to or attribute worth to. And so when you worship, you do whatever it takes to bring honor to the person that you're worshiping. So we worship when we're in the presence of someone that causes us to be in awe. So these wealthy, influential, educated men, they come to this baby who has no visual authority or prestige or anything. And they choose to bow their knee and to worship him because of who they believe that he is. And 5 miles away, King Herod, he's so nervous. He's looking down the road. He's asking around. He's like, have you seen those guys? Have you seen those guys? As soon as you see them, bring them to me. Bring them to me. Because he's super concerned. He spent his whole life controlling things, making sure things go the way he wants. Protecting control. So with his hands clenched and his body's full of pain, and there's no way he has any interest in going, bowing down and worshiping anybody else. Why should he be concerned and pursue someone else's kingdom? He's completely focused on number one. You know, that's why I say there's a little bit of Herod inside of all of us. Because if you're like me, you don't have any problem leveraging God for your own benefit, right? Like, I don't have any problem praying or reading the Bible or going to church or giving in the year-end offering or doing whatever, like if I think it's going to get me to my ends or build my kingdom or do what I want to do. But when it comes to, like, writing God a blank check and saying, hey, God, whatever you want to do, the answer is yes. Completely surrendering and worshiping him. I mean, that doesn't come naturally to any of us, right? Because there's a little bit of Herod inside of all of us. The story continues. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they, the Magi, returned to their country by another route. And when they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. That night, Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary, his mother. Okay, so the Magi and Joseph, they're warned, hey, Herod's coming after, he's going to strike. And so they're directed to go to a safe place. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. Herod was furious. And he was furious because he had been able to dictate outcomes his whole life. And now in his final days, he was losing control. He thought, man, I figured out a way to outsmart everybody one more time. Like, I figured out a way to outsmart destiny. But instead, he had been outsmarted by a baby and his Jewish parents. So Herod, he decides, no, it's not going to end this way. That's not the way the story ends. And so he goes and he gives an order, he gives a command that's so terrible, it's so drastic that it's hard to believe that it's even true. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and in its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. So Herod, he says, you won't bring me the baby? You won't bring me the one that I want? Fine, I'll go kill them all. I'll kill them all. So he gives orders, and the soldiers roll into this little town of Bethlehem, and they knock on all the doors, and they look for any baby that could possibly be in that age range, and they kill them. And anybody who tries to get in the way and tries to stop them, tries to resist, they murder them too. It's horrendous. It's awful. But soon, after the slaughter of those babies, probably within a year, King Herod dies. He dies a painful death because of this kidney disease that he has. The scriptures tell us this. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead. And so in this amazing twist of fate, King Herod, who was known as Herod the Great, who did all these amazing things throughout his life, he becomes a footnote in the story of Jesus, the toddler. Can you imagine explaining this to King Herod in his final hours? He's laying on his deathbed. You walk in and you say, King Herod, I got some good news for you, and I got some bad news. What do you want to hear first? He's like, I'll take the good news. I say, well, the good news is 2,000 plus years from now, people are still going to be talking about you. They're going to be talking about you. Man, all over the world, in countries that haven't been discovered yet, in languages you can't even imagine, people are going to sit in circles and rows, and they're going to be telling a story about you. He's like, yeah, I like it. That's great. Well, what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is you're just a B character. You're just a footnote in the story of a toddler who became the king, who became the savior of the world. And 2,000 years ago, when people talk about you, they will be talking about everything that you built. You'll be known as Herod the builder. You'll be known as Herod the butcher. You were 5 miles away from the birth of the Son of God, and you missed your opportunity. Like, you missed your chance to bend your knee and worship the true King of all, the Son of God. So 80 years later after, Jesus has grown up, he did miracles, he taught to the crowds, he was crucified, he rose to life, he ascended to the Father. 80 years later, King Herod is long gone, Caesar Augustus is long gone, the temple that Herod expanded has been destroyed. 80 years later, the Apostle John, one of Jesus' disciples, he wrote something. For context, after Jesus died, Mary, who was Jesus' mom, he took her to be his mom, and she took him to be her son. And so he would have heard from her all those stories that happened. And so Mary would have told John all about how Jesus was born and how they fled to Egypt and the slaughter that ensued. And John, he walked with Jesus. And he watched him do miracles and preach and teach. He watched him be crucified. He watched him raised from the dead. He stared into an empty tomb, one of the first ones. So he experienced all these things. And now he's an old man. And he says, I'm going to write down something. I'm going to summarize it. And this is why all this story really matters to us and why we should pay attention to that voice that's inside of us, that little flicker, that little flame that we try and push down, why we shouldn't resist it and why we shouldn't ignore it. This is why I'm urging you to re-engage your faith if you've taken a step back. John wrote this, "In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind." So as John reflects, he thinks back on all of his experiences. He declares that Jesus was life in the past tense. When he was here, he was the light of all mankind. So he says that he wasn't just the light of the Jews, he was the light of everyone, of all mankind, the Savior of the world. And then he goes on to speak to you and me today. He says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So John, after all that he's seen and after all that he's experienced, he talks about Jesus in the present tense, in the here and now. And he says, Jesus, that light, he's still shining. And all those things that tried to put him out, King Herod tried to kill Jesus. Jesus was crucified. All the persecution of the early church, all those things that tried to put out the light, they couldn't. The darkness can't overcome the light. It's still burning. It's still shining. It won't stop. Today, the light's still shining. And so that brings us, to you and me, and every other person that ever walks on this earth. We have to ask ourselves a question. What will be my story in relation to the story of the light of the world? When it comes to Jesus, the Son of God, what will my story be? Will it be a story of resistance, or will it be a story of worship? Resistance or worship? Those are our two options. Will it be a story like Herod, who was consumed with establishing his kingdom? Will it be a story of someone who accepts God's offer to be a part of his kingdom? Will we be like Herod? Will be someone whose story is that we held on to everything that we had, even though eventually we were going to lose it anyway? Or will it be the story of someone who willingly gives up everything that they own because they realize there's a greater purpose that we can give to and that it's really not mine to begin with? So will your story be a story of your will or of God's will? And the reason why there's a struggle is that there's a little bit of Herod inside of all of us. It's hard to give up control. It's hard to not pursue me and my kingdom and what I want. But here's what's also true of every one of us. One day, when we're gone, someone will be forced to get up and tell your story in relation to the story of the light of the world. And when they do, they're either going to have to make something up, or they're going to say, there was a time in their life where they made the decision to surrender to God. And there may have been a time when they kind of wandered away, or they second-guessed, or they turned away and they ran, and they weren't even sure. There may have been a time in their life where they felt like the world was crushing and was destroying and was smashing the light and the life that was in them, and they didn't even know if there was anything left. But there was still a flicker, and you said yes to that flicker, and you asked God to kind of fan into flame that little flicker. Today, in this Christmas season, as we focus on Jesus, the true light of the world, and I hope that each and every one of us will choose to worship and not to resist. Those are the only two options. And it doesn't really matter where you've been or how you've wandered or even if you've turned and run. Jesus, the light of the world, is still holding out his hands. He's still offering to you the opportunity to engage with him. And so as we close today, the bands at all of our location, they're going to lead us in a song. It's called Tremble. And it's our opportunity to engage with God. That's what we want to do, is we want to give you this chance. And some of the words in the song really apply to us. There's a line that it asks God to call the rage in me to still. Cause the rage in me to still. And I believe that there are people who are listening who inside you sense there's some rage. There's this battle inside of you. There's that flicker, that light, and there's a resistance. The chorus of the song says that Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. And that's what we've been talking about this entire time. That Jesus, he makes the darkness inside of us and in this world leave. He overcomes it. So I encourage you as we sing this song to make the words a prayer. And if you'll do that, you can watch how God will respond to your faith. For some of us, this could be the very first time that we surrender our lives to God. If you've been listening and you thought, man, I want that. I've sensed that. I need that. Like today can be the day. Today is the day that your whole life has been leading up to. So if that's you, I encourage you just to talk to God and tell him that, to indicate that on your connection card so we can follow up with you and we can encourage you and help you through this because you're not alone. To go to your next steps area at your location and pray with somebody. We'd love to walk with you through this. And for some of us, this is our opportunity to re-engage with our faith. So if you find yourself, I've been in a mode of resisting and of fighting for control. Man, this is your opportunity to just stop. Today, right here, right now, to just stop. To stop running, to stop resisting, and to surrender, and to re-engage with Jesus. For some of us, our hearts are full of gratitude for God, for his faithfulness, and for his love. If that's you, I encourage you just to sing out and to celebrate today. So whatever you want to do, whether you want to stand up and sing, whether you want to sit and reflect, that's totally up to you. And if you're here and you're like, man, I don't even know what I believe. I'm not sure. I ask you to pray a courageous prayer. Say, Jesus, if all this I'm hearing is really true, I ask that you to reveal yourself to me. And I bet he will. I know he will. Wherever you're at in your faith journey, these next 5 minutes are between you and God. So I encourage you to put everything else aside and take the opportunity to fully engage with him.